Star Citizen is a game that needs no introduction. It was announced as a Kickstarter back in 2012 by Chris Roberts, who was previously known for games like Wing Commander and Freelancer, and is now pouring all of his time and resources into Star Citizen's persistent multiplayer universe and its single-player campaign, Squadron 42. At least, that's what we're supposed to believe. When people think about Star Citizen, they often think about the legacy of empty promises, as well as the overpriced ships and the endless unstable alpha phase of the game. But it's the empty promises part that I want to focus on for this video. Star Citizen promised a massive, persistent, seamless sandbox universe with fully simulated ship interiors, complex gameplay mechanics, and a beautiful blend of handcrafted and procedurally generated content to create what was promised to basically be the biggest video game of all time. Fast forward to today, and what we have now is basically a demo, the actual playability of which is, to put it generously, a mixed bag. Genuine moments of phenomenal gameplay hidden between hours of frustration. Personally, I made my pledge a very long time ago, and I do occasionally return to the verse to see just how much progress they've made, and to give credit where it's due, it can be a lot of fun, especially with friends. The promise of Star Citizen definitely shows, but it's still not complete. And a lot of gamers have lost their patience. But when you have a genre with limited options, everyone wants the next big game to be the masterpiece that defines the genre. Star Citizen showed us what that could look like all the way back in 2012, and almost 14 years later, with no full release in sight, gamers are projecting their desires and expectations for that game onto other developers. Let's start with a game that used to be the top dog when it came to space games, Elite Dangerous. This game is a fully modeled 1-to-1 scale simulation of the Milky Way galaxy, with complex spaceflight mechanics, a wide variety of gameplay options, and a persistent galaxy shaped by player action. The problem is, it is first and foremost a spaceflight simulator. In fact, up until the release of the Odyssey expansion in 2021, on-foot gameplay wasn't even a thing. All you could do was fly around in your ship or drive around planetary surfaces in an SRV. Before that, you couldn't even land on planets without the Horizons expansion, both of which, by the way, are paid add-ons to the base game, which is still primarily a spaceflight simulator. But gamers want more. Every time I watch a new video related to Elite Dangerous, I see multiple comments begging Frontier to add ship interiors. Now, to be entirely fair, ship interiors were promised years ago, back when the game was in its Kickstarter phase, so part of this is definitely on them. But there is also an entire discussion out there about fully simulated ship interiors being essential to space games, and it is the reason why people want them that lead me to believe that they won't be satisfied even if ship interiors were added to Elite Dangerous. It's not enough to just have a place to hang out inside your ship. People want a fully simulated ship that requires a full crew to operate. They want features like engineering. They want flyable carriers that can house smaller ships. They want Star Citizen. And while all that sounds awesome, some games just aren't designed for that experience. Elite Dangerous is a game that's been around for over a decade now. The ships in it were never designed to have fully simulated interiors in the first place, and the gameplay itself doesn't really fit this vision. As said before, it is a solo-friendly flight simulator that doesn't aim to lock certain ship functionalities behind how many friends you have, and I don't think it ever should. Another game that was a subject of the ship interior debate until quite recently was No Man's Sky. Before the Voyagers update, we just had fighters and capital-class ships, but now we have a new ship type, in the form of corvettes. These mobile bases are basically an upgraded version of Starfield's shipbuilding mechanic, which was genuinely one of that game's best features. No Man's Sky now has it as well, along with the ability to spacewalk outside your ship, which doesn't really have any functional purpose yet, but it is cool. But No Man's Sky, as much as it's grown since release, still suffers from repetition, which is just an inevitable consequence of a game this size being almost entirely procedurally generated. It's also a survival game, and not a full space life simulator like Star Citizen wants to be. The player-built ships are still mostly for aesthetic purposes, and I just don't think this feature, which works in a game where creativity plays a huge role, would fit quite well in just any other game, especially not one like Elite Dangerous. And then there's Starfield, the game that pioneered this shipbuilding mechanic in the first place. Part of me feels bad for Bethesda, man. They tried diving into into a genre they had no business being a part of, populated by a bunch of people who are impatiently waiting for someone to fulfill Star Citizen's promise. On paper, Starfield has everything I wanted: ship interiors, planetary exploration, an NPC crew, handcrafted man-made locations mixed in with procedurally generated landscapes, all in a finished and comparatively polished package. But then we remembered that this is still a Bethesda game, and therefore we have to deal with many problems, but for the purposes of this video, I'll just mention the loading screens, which is something that I actually appreciate in earlier Bethesda games, where it allows every building to have a fully detailed interior, and if Elder Scrolls 6 needs loading screens to achieve that effect again, then so be it. But another key word I use to describe Star Citizen is seamless. Starfield has loading screens everywhere, and some mods, like Astrogate, have shown that the game just doesn't even need all of them. Bethesda just never bothered to implement a Super Cruise-style system like you can find in Elite Dangerous or Star Citizen or No Man's Sky. You get the picture. Starfield is also a single-player RPG set in space, but expanding into a limited genre reveals just how many fans expected and wanted it to actually be a space sim. To players expecting Star Citizen levels of immersion, every single load screen is a reminder that Starfield just isn't that game. Not to mention the inevitability of having to use some procedural generation in a game of this magnitude is a massive contradiction of one of the main things Bethesda fans love about their games: the intimate handcrafted experience with 16 times the detail, as Todd Howard says. It's like the game tried to be two things at once and failed at both. You know, The Outer Worlds is even further from the genre than Starfield, and yet it's more loved for many reasons, but mainly because the game knows what it is and doesn't try to be anything else. One pattern that I have seen through the release of Starfield and Elite Dangerous Odyssey is the before and after attitude towards Star Citizen. Both of these games, before the release, were described by many as the final nail in Star Citizen's coffin, and both times Star Citizen not only survived, but thrived. So that's where we are now, and keep in mind that I only named the big examples that everyone knows and talks about, but there are so many other games out there feeling the same pressure from their player base. I'm also not saying that just because a game can't fit these expectations means they can't be good or successful, nor are said expectations the sole reason behind the shortcomings of some other games. Whatever the case, there will always be that excessive demand for them to be something that they simply are not, and probably never will be. The space game genre is limited, and even though many of these games serve a completely different purpose functionally, I keep seeing a lot of gamers out there that want them to be, at least in some ways, what we were all promised when we first heard about Star Citizen.